Boethius was really no stranger to good fortune. By the time he had hit the noontime of life, so he's about his mid-30s, going on to about 40, he had already achieved great fame as a statesman, as an orator, and especially as a scholar. By the time he's about in his mid-30s, he had written treatises on arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. So he's really a master of the quadrivium. And then it's into his late 30s and around the age of 40 that he really brings this to fruition, in public life. He becomes a master of the trivium as well, grammar, rhetoric, and logic. But especially, it's those years as a statesman that really make Boethius his fortune. And he rises to the highest ranks of Roman society. In about 520, he's made master of the king's offices, so still holding a very high place. And then in 522, Boethius's two sons share a year in the consulship together. And reflecting on this later, Boethius would call this the proudest moment of his life, when he saw his two sons hailed by the Senate as consuls, and then himself being praised for his own fine oratory over the many decades of service he'd given to the king. Now this is where his fortunes really begin to turn, though, and that's what makes this excerpt from Boethius so interesting in light of his biography. Because at this point, Boethius really begins to lose the favor of the king. Boethius kind of explains this in the Consolation of Philosophy. He talks about how a friend of his, Albinus, was accused of treason, and he tried to remove those accusations. But most of all, he blocked any such additional accusations from being brought against the Senate. So Boethius himself maintained, of course, his own innocence, and even Theodoric, years afterward would regret having sentenced Boethius to death. But it's while Boethius is in prison and awaiting his execution that he writes the Consolation of Philosophy. Now, in the Consolation of Philosophy, Lady Philosophy visits Boethius in prison, and really the entire text is a record of a dialogue that unfolds between Lady Philosophy on the one hand and Boethius on the other. And fortune is one of those prime topics of conversation. So now for the really difficult part. Lady Philosophy actually tries to convince Boethius that good fortune is actually bad for you, and bad fortune is good for you. She explains that what makes this so difficult to put into words is that it's a paradox. A seemingly illogical statement is rendered logical beyond all scope of reason, and specifically by an appeal to those two antithetical terms. The paradox of education is really like the paradox of fortune itself. The more you humble yourself before the vastness of the subjects before you, the more you will be able to excel in those subjects. And it sounds odd, but it is an enduring truth, that those who exalt themselves shall be humbled, and those who humble themselves shall be exalted. And really this, I think, is, for me, the enduring image of what the academy is about. When I think of the long procession of faculty at any of the great university rituals, commencement, convocation, and so on, I think that all of that procession of every professor going by in their academic regalia, adorned in their academic honors, to me that represents their endurance, their perseverance in that humble submission before the vastness of each one's own subject area. If you think about it this way, the less you know, the more you will know. And don't forget what Socrates says about the source of his own wisdom. He says, he is wise because he knows that he knows nothing. And that, I think, is the paradox, the kind of paradox that Boethius is after in the Consolation of Philosophy.